You've probably seen countless examples of topology for the hand. Some are good, some are not so good, and some are just intended for movies. But how do we retopologize the hand for the games industry? In this video, I'm going to show you how to retopologize this crazy deformer. It's easier than you think. I've made 3 PDFs for you guys, so it's covering tips, tricks, hacks, common problems, and a cheat sheet. So make sure you download that below. Hi, I'm Virtus, and welcome to 3D Mutiny, where every once in a while we need a helping. So here we're going to go over the hand retopology and how to quad draw this in Maya, which is part of a larger character. And if you want to know how to sculpt a hand like this, I've got a video which I'll link in below. So this hand is comprised of the main part with layers and also with the addition of nails that are a separate subtool. So first you need to understand what makes a really good guide mesh, the thing that we're going to bring into Maya. I've also done a video which breaks down the best method to make that initial guide. So after following that video, we should be able to take a high poly and have it survive within Maya. Also what you see here is my scene set out in a particular way, so we can start on the retopology and quad draw. I've got different materials for my high polys and I'm going to have different materials for my low polys. So there's also an additional video for that. So if you want to understand how to set your scene ready for this retopology task, I'll also link that as well. Once you've brought in the original guide, let's stick to good practice. And I'm just going to group this by pressing Ctrl-G and then call it guides. Now in those videos, we go over how to set up something called a GPU cache, which makes your guides and your high polys much faster in Maya. But also at the same time, remember, you don't have to use those GPU guides. We can just use very efficient versions of. So here, for example, I've just got a normal subdivided version, and it's going to be good enough because I can see all the nails. I can see all the incisions that we're going to be doing for the quad draw. So to initiate quad draw, we're going to come and make this a live surface. And this is going to be a larger part of a wider series about making game meshes. So make sure you check the channel and subscribe for future videos like that. Coming into quad draw, we're going to open the modeling toolkit, which is this hammer, activate quad draw, and you can also activate it up here with this little button. So what you should know by now is that we can create active points, hold shift, then fill in a polygon. And then once that polygon's filled in, it's going to create a new object. And this is going to be our hand low poly. So just rename it up here and then put it into its own group. So remember, if you ever want to come back into this quad draw mode, you always have to have the hand select first before you press quad draw. So in actual fact, we're not going to go down the initial route of plotting in active points and filling it in. It can take a lot of time. So what we're actually going to do is bring in some primitive and then lock those to things like the finger. Then we're going to duplicate them across to save us loads of time. Then after, what we're going to do is connect those all together. And then there's going to be some key loops for animation and deformation. Maybe also there's going to be some key loops to define the nail's edge, which can be useful for texture artists. And when it comes to unwrapping, we have to think about that process. So what loops are going to be inserted into the hand that's going to help us when it comes to opening up onto a 2D surface. So I can't imagine how many times I've done retopology on a hand. So usually I like to start with about 10 subdivisions, and that's for a couple of reasons. It gives us these nice parallel edges, and where we're going to aim them, they're going to be down the sides of the finger, and it's going to be what splits the top from the bottom half of the hand and what will eventually become our UV seam. So those are going to be very useful. It also gives us this nice top surface and bottom surface, and that's going to act as the top of the finger and the bottom of the finger here. So if you imagine, we're going to have a nice flat surface on the top that we can add additional loops to, and also it's going to form the basis of the tip of the nail. So while we're here, we're going to do some pre-modeling. It's going to save us time. We ideally want to optimize our workflows, especially in the industry. You want to save a lot of time. So I'm going to select the center vert and press Ctrl-B. That's going to give us this front face that we can work with, and then I'm going to move it up and then just scale it. So come into the modeling toolkit, and then we're going to use multi-cut. First, we're going to connect this vertice to this vertice, and that's going to complete our lovely UV seam. And now we're going to connect this vert to this vert and do the same on the opposite side. So this has set the topological foundation for the structure. So if I hold Control while multi-cut's activated, you can see the edge loops that we can insert. So say it's a bigger finger that needs more topology, we can easily come in here and insert it. And because we know we're going to split this and connect them to each side of the finger, we know that that edge loop's going to continue around the hand. So it's a really useful thing to do early on. I'll also delete the bottom faces. So come to face, hold tab, and then just ring select these, and we can delete that. Also, to make it easier, I'm going to press D, and then we can move the pivot point just to the tip of the finger. I'm going to position that in the center one, the middle finger. So here we've almost made a bit of a sewing thumbtack, and just double check that everything is aligned correctly. So we've got that midsection UV seam that we put in, and then we've got the top surface and the bottom surface as we described. If you hold W, you can change this gizmo to object oriented instead of world oriented. So you can rotate it and move it as such. You can hold R R and do the same for the scaling. Now here what I'm going to do is going to select all these vertices at the top and I'm going to position them just at the base of the finger. So it's important to note while I've been doing this that the live guide surface hasn't been activated because we're moving in normal world space. I don't want to accidentally select this high poly, so I'm going to select the high poly now, or the guide, and I'm going to come to this button and then add it to a layer. So from the previous video you understand that we can actually turn this button, the third button, turn it to R, then that means we won't accidentally click it. And also from the previous video we set up these high poly and low polys that we can use at later dates, and with the high poly on the finger that we're creating, I'm just going to turn up the transparency, and that means I can see the underlying high poly surface, and then we can basically position this topology. So first what I want to do is actually rotate all of these vertices, and it's going to be important at a later date because that's going to be cut off, or it could potentially be cut off when we do UVing. Obviously you can scale it up, and then we're going to use quad draw to make it snap, so try and get it as accurate as possible, but it's not super required. Do the same with the fingertip, so get it as close as possible. It's a generic finger that we're going to use on all of them, so it's not super required. So in all the rotations you'll see that this center line, the one I have highlighted, has gone off to the side a bit. You ideally want to aim this all the way down the center of the knuckle, and then that's going to help us later with the topology. So get all the vertices and select them and then just twist it around. So while we're here, I guess that I could have a bit of a comment on hand layouts. So some people like to sculpt them straight, so they're all pointed out. So animators usually like that. The thing is it looks a bit unnatural, so it's hard to sculpt anatomy when you have this sort of like opened hand. But when we do have a bend in there with our high poly, it is a little bit easier to locate those joints and especially draw the bones on, because when fingers are bending, the knuckle still stays intact, so it's important to have that geometry sort of holding that. So coming back into quad draw, go to the outliner, select the guide, make it a live surface, and you have to do it in this order. Also select the low poly, and then we can come back into quad draw mode. I don't really like the default look of quad draw, so there are a couple of options you can change, like in the live constraints you can potentially turn off, then that means we can see the underlying high poly. First what we're going to start with is putting in the knuckle, so hold control. Coming back to the live face, I'm going to distribute these evenly across the finger. Holding shift's going to relax it, and further to that, if you press B, we come into soft select mode, then hold B and click and drag to the left. Going to reduce the size of the radius for this. Really good for positioning generic topology. Okay, so the key landmarks, we obviously have this seam edge. Really make sure that that's halfway between the finger from the top and the half, and then do the same on the other side. See, it's dropping a bit here, so just make sure that's halfway. So basically what we've done here is made a bit of a finger sock with all our alignments correct. So the top one is going up here, the bottom one is nicely aligned, and we do have those middle edges. Now we're going to put in additional loops to adhere to the form, so just go halfway up and down it. Wherever we hit a joint, it's important to angle these in the direction of the joint. That's going to help your animators. So you can see we've got this nice transitioned angle. That knuckle's going to bend nice. Okay, at this stage it's just about turning all your quads so they're nice and square. We tend to like to have a lot of geometry on the fingers, so when in doubt just put additional loops and additional geometry in. Something like this is fine, and then when you get to a knuckle, I'm sure you heard a lot of places, you just want to have many loops here. So some people like to put supporting geometry in there. I'll show you how I like to do it. So locate the center knuckle face and then select the one surrounding it. It should absorb basically all the knuckle. Press Control B and then that's going to bevel it. After that, come back into quad draw. You can press Y if that was your last selected tool. After that, come back to quad draw. Now we can just close these triangles up. Triangles are fine, but for the finger, we just want a couple of quads, so it's nice and easy. Going to come down to the mesh alpha and then just turn this up really high so we can see the geometry. Now at this stage, we can come into soft selection, and I'm just going to smooth these areas. And naturally, what's going to happen is this square shape's going to turn a bit more spherical. That's going to provide support when under constraints. So for example, when the finger starts to bend, we can use these additional pieces of geometry to keep that cylindrical shape inside of the knuckle. I wouldn't sweat it too much because we're going to duplicate it across. So at some point you might need some extra loops, say that the animation team asks for that. You can just come here, hold control, and I like to insert them 3 times either side inside of this sort of like quadded area. You'll note that I can also put cylindrical ones if I need some more knuckle support, but insert them on the center and then use the same smooth just to evenly distribute them. Sometimes people like to turn this bottom bit into triangles because they all collapse together. To be honest, I'd leave it as it is. In the games industry, we don't care too much unless it's like a mobile game. No one's going to shout at you for having extra loops and extra points when it comes to a joint. For the sake of this, I'm going to keep that nice and low. Next, we're going to do the nail. So I just usually like to square this off slightly and make sure it's supporting the tip of the finger. And then because we made that structure initially, I can hold control and then insert another loop. I'll come out of quad draw and I actually like to position the nail topology so we still have the active guide and it's going to snap to the edge. Just is far more precise and less edits. Now you see I've stopped it there. It depends on the game, but if you do want to put some more nail geometry, so for example separate this area, you can come into multi-cut and then start to add additional loops. So for example we can make this sort of shape and then I've left an additional vert here and then I can connect that up there. And it just means we maintain all our quads. You can also reflect this top bit onto the edge of the nail if you do want to have, but remember that triangles are totally fine in the games industry. It just depends on your preferences. The only thing a try here will do is stop us do additional loops. So if you don't care about that, it's fine. For me, it creates quite a nice structure here that I can use as the tip of the nail. Okay, so we've done that. I'm not going to spend too much time. You can also push these edge loops up so it really gives that nice, and then when it comes to it, you can add the additional loops, maybe make the nail nice and curved. But fundamentally, all the normal maps are going to pick up those details, so you don't want to get too refined with it. Okay, so just double check that all your geometry is nice. We've got those seam lines in, we've got the top and the bottom, and at this stage, we're just going to duplicate the finger across and use it for each one. In the previous videos, I go over how to make the high poly transparent, and it's really useful, especially for these examples, so you don't get lost with the low poly. Okay, so I've positioned all these and we can adjust them later. And then with the thumb, what I like to do is just come to face mode and then select everything for the knuckle. And then that's going to turn into our thumb. If you press Control Shift and I, that's going to invert the selection and you can just delete the rest. So now I'm just going to come one by one with the object, activate quad draw with the soft selection and adjust these to fit. Okay, so now we have some nice structure for all the fingers and all these edges are going to be directed in the right locations. We're going to do the wrist and then connect them all together. You can preview it by pressing V, hiding all the guides. What I'm going to do is going to select them all, shift right click and then come to combine. Now you can see we can access quad draw all at the same time. Okay, now we're going to make the wrist. I'm just going to make a box shape by using the quad tool. So we're going to use this to connect the wrist and the hand. Obviously you might already have the forearm. What I suggest doing is leaving the forearm and the hand separate and then solving that at a later date. So we're going to approach this in order of importance. The first one I'm going to do is connect these seam edges, which splits the hand in two, and create a geometry across that. It will initially look funny at first, but we can add loops later. The most important thing is that you get that structure in first, like we did with the finger, and you can test if you're doing it right. So you just hold Control and make sure that this lovely loop goes all the way down the center. Okay, so we've got these loops and just double check that they lead along the bottom of the knuckle joint that we created here. And next what we're going to do is connect the thumb so it leads across this piece of skin all the way back to the other center half of the thumb. I like to extrude both the edges and then connect them together. Okay, so now we've got that basic structure. We're going to continue it up to the wrist. So while I'm doing this, I'm trying to imagine exactly where the center of the thumb is going to be, where that bone leads up. Going to make it fall short just there, just in case we need to put in additional loops. So we'll do all this connection a bit later. Okay, now we're going to do in between the fingers. So if you imagine we're trying to suit the surfaces, when it comes to knuckle, you've got this sort of big surface, which is either side of the knuckle. And then you've got this center joint that basically splits and provides the V shape. So what you want to do is basically replicate this inside of the geometry. And then obviously we get natural pinching of the vertices. So it might be an idea that we can turn those into tries. So it's totally up to you. All artists will do it differently, but you definitely want this center line first. Now, after you've got this shape, I like to think as low poly as physically possible. Maybe straighten it up so they're not so harsh spikes when it comes to the joints here. Now we're going to create our own guide system. So it's where the tops of the fingers came in important. I'm just going to drag the center ones and aim them up the wrist. So with the silhouettes, we've got a tendon here, so it's actually quite sharp, but because we've done nice structure at a later date, we can put an additional loop here and that's going to adhere better to a silhouette. So if you are making structure, just try and drag it as far as physically possible, and you're going to have an estimation of where this is going to terminate. So it's going to start here and finish somewhere up the wrist. Like the finger, we're going to put them on the joints. So I'm just going to split this wherever the knuckle's located. Another important line is here. You can see it. It's what splits the knuckles and the fingers apart. You can see the specular highlight that's happening. So you want to replicate that in the geometry. So that's those parts. And you can see that I've stopped them here in the anticipation that we're going to fill them in after. So shift click and fill those all in. So where it connects to the thumb is a bit more interesting. So this is the last time that we can complete the loop. So basically close it here, and eventually what this will turn into is additional geometry up there and split off into either a pole or a triangle. And you can see just by rotating how the edges are keeping the form of our knuckles and the pits, and it's also providing good animation loops in terms of quads. So we've done the tops of the knuckles, and I've just done the exact same on the underneath, and I've kept it in quads so we can put additional loops in, and we'll basically clean it up afterwards. So here you can start putting in additional loops with control, and you'll see that it's starting to adhere better to the guide. And the same is true underneath. You're starting to see those fat pads come out where the underneath of the knuckle is. So it's really important to actually have these edges directed in the correct place. So the top of the edge is on the outside of the knuckle, and then the inside of the edge is where's considered the inside of the knuckle, sort of like the fatty surface. So it's important to have loops here, because if you imagine if we're making like a fighting character or a clenched fist character, the knuckles are going to bend over and there won't be enough vertices here to support that big arching shape. So in actual fact, we might have a lot of loops here, and that's going to keep the structure. Sometimes people like to put supporting structures for this knuckle shape. If you imagine when you do your knuckles, they're going to poke out and there's going to be a very bony area. So if you're going for realism, I'd replicate what you did down here, what we did down here. But again, I'm going to undo that and just make sure we're working at a very low resolution. So that's the most important features done. The next ones I would do are around here. So I'd hold tab and then just bring this surface out. This area, there's going to be a lot of skin, a lot of flexion. The thumb's going to be moving upwards. It's going to be moving down. Quite a lot of geometry and supporting geometry in there. We also got a big bit of skin. So it might be an idea to put additional loops in there. Obviously the thumb joint sort of like joins back into the main hand. So you still want to try and maintain loops where you can. So try and think of a ribbon face coming all the way across the knuckle. So that would involve leading it up here. So how do we achieve a loop here but sort of maintain this structure? So basically you can stretch two quads really close together, and what that's naturally going to make is this sort of like 5-edged, something we call like a star or a pole, and then from that pole you can extrude out and create another piece of geometry, and you can see that this direction is now going to lead back up to the hand. And the same for this area, we can put another pole. So it can be quite confusing to try and get an edge that leads down here but then another edge that leads up here, because what you'll have is a very big face here. So here's an interesting area. Ideally I want this loop to aim up the hand. So what I can do is just reshape this quad, and you probably think that we now have to make a triangle here. You probably could, it wouldn't really change much, but if you want a couple of more options, it might be an idea to direct it across the hand. So what you can do is just move this vert upwards, point in this direction, and you can just fill in the rest like this, and then you can just smooth it out so it's just easier geometry to work with. Totally fine to leave this floating, because then you can solve it later, or if you want to, you can just insert a loop and then connect. You know, this is kind of like a bit of cool geometry. We've got an edge that is in this direction, fist is clenched, with then to get a very nice straight piece of geometry that goes in this direction. So this pole is actually working quite well, almost like a pivot point for the hand, and then you'll get all this compression that happens with this geometry. Okay, now it's just a case of completing and filling in the surfaces. You might find that this initial shape is becoming a bit redundant, so it's totally okay to get these and then snap them together, and then we're left with more low poly surface. Especially for such a flat section, you don't need that much geometry. So where you can turn things into tries, a common one is just to terminate them around here. We don't want the triangles to be too big, because they can cause a little bit of issues when doing animation. So just come along and then basically hold shift. If this wacky stuff is happening, then just hold tab. We also insert the loops here just so we can close up these triangles. Okay, so now we've got something that's closed up and it looks kind of pretty, you know, it's a pretty pattern, but what you really want to be thinking about and the important stuff is, do I have loops that are going to help me? Does the deformation work under different constructions? So can I bend the fingers well? Will the forms hold? Can I stretch this skin and will the form hold? Can I clench my fist and the knuckle pop out? So these are the questions you should be asking yourself, not basically if it's like nice and symmetrical or the top of the hand matches the bottom of the hand. Now at this stage it's about filling in the surfaces. Now there's no right or wrong way of doing this. The only thing I would suggest is that you try and direct your main loops up in this direction and create a bit of a grid-like system, because if you imagine the hand, it actually can collapse in on itself, so we might need some geometry to hold that structure. And with the thumb, it's a bit of the same, but you're sort of aiming in this direction, and potentially you might have a lot of poles, or you can even have tries here. It's not too much of an issue. So here we've got an edge, and now we can continue this edge by putting additional edge loops in. That opens us to fill this area that we can fix. Now if we drag and try and conclude these, we understand that we need an additional loop here, but before doing that, it's probably worth smoothing this area, and it will save you repositioning all the vertices one at a time. Okay, so we got somewhat of a nice distribution there, so you can start to insert the loops, and now it's a case of lining up all your edges. So for example, lining the edge up here, and then we've got two additional ones here that are kind of completing this side of the palm, that silhouette, so we can insert those. And it's safe to insert these because I know that it's not going to continue all the way around the arm or the hand, and then we can fix this area later. So try and think as broadly as possible and only insert the loops where it's required. After that, you can come in and just smooth everything away. So here's an example of where we can do a bit of topology flow adjustment. This will work, but if you want a little bit of a better animation, a bit more of a grid system that leads up the palm. So currently what we have, and if I paint it in yellow, we've got a nice loop system here, but then the edges start to lead up there slightly. So it'd just be a bit better if they were on the pink one. So to do that, I'm going to look for where I can connect loops. So I can connect these two together, and that's going to create one loop there. Now to get an additional loop, I can see that I can connect. Now I've got more of a continuous bendy straw structure around the line. And with such an open surface like this can just naturally turn into a pole. So I'm just going to drag these out like that. So there we go. We just quickly adjusted this to our topology needs. So we've got better animation loops up there, and now we can start to figure out how to terminate this later. So around this area you might have a lot of vertices because this is going to be opening up. You don't want too many vertices here because that's not going to be stretching as much. So there's ways of basically turning loops back onto themselves. For example, we can create this sort of like trapezius shape, hold tab and connect here and just extrude. And that's going to basically create this bit of and give us less edges on the top, and now we can continue with that direction. So the good thing about this is it gives us a central loop, and you don't have to have these, it's just all different decisions. But basically if we wanted more stretch and animation on this side of the inside of the skin where the thumb connects, we can just add the loops there. What it's done is basically made this bucket that has the ability to hinge and open like this, and then we get presented lots of nice geometry that can support this inside line. Now I want to make sure that you understand that you don't have to do these things as long as you've got enough. Slightly irrelevant. So back in the day when there was lots of low poly stuff, you might see on knee joints there'd be a very special formation of topology, but now in current gen, you know, as long as you just have additional points, there's so many waiting opportunities for animators to create different shapes. So don't stress that you can't create this shape, or maybe an artist does it a different way, or they find something's better. Okay, now it's a case of, obviously this is quite low poly, so you can put some additional loops in here and try and target them in specific areas. What I usually like to do is set the middle finger down the center line and then basically connect everything after that. Because the wrist is a small joint, it's naturally going to compress with a lot of geometry, so don't stress that that's happening, because what's going to happen is it's basically going to open up again and then give support to this wider circumference. Okay, so most importantly is that we just have the ability to make loops around the wrist, and the rest is up for your interpretation. So you could put tries in here, or you could put some poles. It's not too much of an issue. The wrist naturally wants to stray away from becoming a loop, so what I would do is just split this off and extrude it like that into a pole. So once we've got that pole there, what this is doing, it's kind of creating this natural arch, which is going to be useful for supporting all this structure. If you imagine your thumb, there's like a bit of connection here and a joint, so that could be useful. Maybe the geometry is going to look something like this. Okay, and then so after this point, I can just go around and move the verts around to where they're most needed and where they're most important. If there's some places that need additional loops because we've put the structure in, we can just insert that and then relax it back. So there's so many options that we can do here, but now we've got this structure and we can start to adjust to the silhouettes. So if you followed along, this provides a really solid foundation. If you need additional loops for your joints, you can add them here. We don't have any triangles interfering with that. We did some smart things with poles just to adjust the flow of the topology. For example, with the fist, we can put additional loops in, and when the animation team requires more additional verts, they can find them up the hand, and it's going to support that structure. You could put in the nails, not required, it depends on the game. Maybe if it was AAA high fidelity, you would want nails. If it was sort of like a mobile phone game, you wouldn't really require them. You just let the normal map do that. So if you enjoyed that workflow, please leave a like and subscribe, because I'm going to be releasing more quad tool and topology tips when it comes to games. At some point, I'll also be releasing these kinds of meshes for you to put on your own characters, and I'll add supporting videos for that. So go down into the description and sign up on the website. So you get a free welcome package and then all the subsequent things that I'll be sending out. We also have a Discord community where people are posting works in progress like this. In fact, it's the place where I started this retopology series, just by looking at the problems that people were having. So if you have any suggestions for videos, there's forum posts there where you can suggest them. Check out the other videos. So there's one on the fundamentals of quad draw, common misconceptions, how to fit different objects to different assets. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.